Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья! Сегодня у нас с вами Джук с Себастьяном Дашнером. Помогать нам с вами будет наш замечательный друг и товарищ с 2000 какого там, 12 года Барух Садогурский. Барух у нас тут регулярно появляется в эфирах. Мы Баруха благодарим за сотрудничество и за большую помощь. Вообще он нас очень сильно помогает в этой всей замечательной нашей ситуации. И Дашнера, Себастьяна мы тоже благодарим за помощь, потому что, конечно, он практически у нас герой, идет тут с нами во всяческие онлайн-эксперименты и на самом деле очень здорово нам помогает. Вообще сейчас, конечно, мир с переходом в онлайн очень сильно поменялся, и для спикеров, вообще говоря, онлайн — это такой интересный челлендж, потому что, ну, все мы с вами понимаем, что конференция и митап — это такой нетворкинг, общение, все в этом духе. А что нам дает онлайн? Вот нам сейчас и предстоит разобраться, и мы активно разбираемся. И тем не менее, у нас сейчас, конечно, нет там ответов на все вопросы, которые нас интересуют, но мы хотя бы примерно разобрались с технической частью. И надо сказать, что митапы в онлайне, которые мы проводим, их довольно много. Те, кто смотрит нас на meetup.ru.com, на meetup.ru.org, те, наверное, уже знают, что у нас очень много митапов по самым разным технологиям. И кроме того, что это сами по себе часто довольно интересные события, мы еще готовимся активно к тем конференциям, которые у нас сейчас будут проходить в июне-июле. И давайте посмотрим, что нас ждет. У нас будет целый ряд конференций на удаленке. Это кроме конференции G-Point, которая у нас начнется в конце июня и закончится в начале июля. Это еще много замечательных конференций. Если коротко посмотреть, что там будет, у нас будет очень много интересных спикеров. Например, у нас будет Джеймс Гослинг, который создатель Java, и он будет у нас на G-Point с Q&A-сессией. У нас будет Джоэл Спольский, который создатель Stack Overflow и автор замечательного, суперзнаменитого на весь мир блога Joel on Software. Он тоже у нас будет на G-Point с Q&A-сессией. Кроме того, и на самом G-Point будет очень много классных, офигенных докладчиков. И будет очень много докладчиков прекрасных на других конференциях. Вот среди них есть Бьорн Страуструп, который создатель C++, Джон Уиллис, один из DevOps, ну и многие-многие другие замечательные ребята. Все подробности вы можете узнать на сайте live.jukru.org, где будут все детали. Если очень коротко, то у нас будет там, по-моему, что-то около 250 спикеров в сумме на этом замечательном мероприятии. Если вам интересно, то заходите на live.jukru.org и покупайте замечательные билеты на наши замечательные конференции. Вообще говоря, мы видим, как народ переосмысливает все происходящее, видит, как сейчас адаптируется к тому, что происходит, видит, как меняется ситуация, видит, как меняется мир, и народ начинает осознавать, что все-таки новая онлайн-реальность есть. Ее, конечно, можно игнорировать, потому что мы, наверное, все понимаем, что она рано или поздно закончится. Но те, кто, наверное, совсем ее будут в целом игнорировать, те, кто уже сейчас не озаботились, там, не знаю, покупкой хорошего роутера домой, да, или какой-то банальной там вебки приличной, какого-то там микрофона, камеры, те сейчас теряют время, потому что не только их коммуникация затруднена, но и самое главное, коммуникация с ними затруднена. Поэтому я всем рекомендую вытащить голову из песка, кто этого еще не сделал, перестать занимать позу страуса и понять, что на ближайшее время онлайн наш все, виртуальные митинги, виртуальные конференции, конференции на удаленке, то, что нас с вами ждет в этом году. Ну и все, наверное, до этой части. Я думаю, что пора поприветствовать в эфире Баруха и Себастьяна. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to introduce you Baruch Sadogurski and Sebastian Dashner. Hello, guys. How are you doing?
Hey there.
Привет.
Okay, let's go. Let's
Okay,
start.
Sebastian, welcome to the meetup, and the floor is yours. I will monitor the chat for any questions, and we'll try to intervene in the appropriate moments with the questions from the audience. But the rest of it, it's all yours. Take it away.
Awesome. Всем привет. Меня зовут Себастьян. И я работаю в качестве евангелиста программного обеспечения для IBM. И я учу русский немножко, но я еще плохо говорю, поэтому I will talk in English. I hope that's okay. And yes, I want to talk about Quarkus and this new way of doing enterprise Java. So I'm sharing my my screen already. And don't worry, there won't be much slides. So it's going to be mostly live coding and live demos. And also I want to have some just conversations. So if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. We will have some polls available. And then also we can just talk about a few things that I think make sense. So if we want to start out with Quarkus for modern enterprise Java, then if you look at the website quarkus.io, you see a lot of like buzzwords like supersonic, subatomic, Java, and all that. But besides all of this marketing, I want to show you what it is about and why we might care about this new way of doing enterprise Java, especially if you already have knowledge with Java Enterprise or with Spring and what that means for this new way of doing things. And then I have some live code for you. I will share, of course, all of the code with you afterwards so you can relax and just grab all of it later and, of course, ask questions. So what I have for you is a project that is a Quarkus project and actually a Maven project. And yeah, lubię coffee. So this is why I have a coffee shop example application, which I will live code for you. And the application for now does a few things with HTTP and REST. And I just want to show you how to, well, all of the building blocks, the most important ones in Quarkus, and how to get started. If you want to get started with the technology, you can go to quarkus.io and then start coding. You have some code generation that's similar to what Spring can do for you, and just generate some project. So which will give you a Maven project like this. Let's have a brief look. That is just a Maven project with some BOM from Quarkus, and I introduced some dependencies here. So if you're familiar with enterprise Java, this looks a little bit weird at the beginning because you have to pull in many small dependencies. For example, for how to enable REST and how to enable JSON binding and a few other things that we will talk about. I have a bunch of test dependencies, and I use JDK 14. I hope you're all working on the latest Java releases already. So that works with Quarkus, and I use the version 1.4.2. And yes, let's get started. So basically, in order to build it, I build it in the way how you would build any Maven project. You can do Maven install if you want, Maven clean install, Maven clean package, or just Maven package, which will just build the project, and then also does a plugin that is called build Quarkus Maven plugin with some build phase. We will talk about that in a second. And basically what that produces is some jar files here on the target that are actually quite small. We will talk about that as well. And then in order to execute this Quarkus application, what we just do is java-jar, and then we run this application coffee shop runner. So similar if you come from a Spring background, this is quite similar to Spring Boot, and you see actually it starts up very quickly. And this now listens on localhost 8080. So I will walk you through the code in a second, but just quickly, let's grab the project here. What I will just do, I use in the command line, I use curl to access some REST resources here, localhost 8080, and I have some coffee orders that we can access. And then it says, okay, great, 200, okay, my application is running, and that gives me some output already. So I'll show the code, and then we can actually live code something finally. So just to get started, I have some coffee domain. And this is the entry point for what I just did, the HTTP resource. So these annotations, if you're not familiar with them, that is called JAX-RS. It's a standard for RESTful web services. If you think about it, it looks very similar to what you can do with Spring, right? With Spring REST controllers. You have like slightly different annotations, but it's pretty much the same. You just do some HTTP mapping with JSON. And then what we do, we can get some coffee orders that gives us a JSON array. We can get individual orders. We can order some new coffee by posting something here. And now, if you come from an enterprise Java background, then you might know all of these annotations. That looks familiar, right? And that is already a good point, I think. You don't have to relearn again from scratch all of the APIs, because I think there's no point. That's boring, right? Why would you reinvent the wheel all over again? We already have more than enough APIs for doing REST stuff, I think. but that is supported. So Quarkus supports enterprise Java APIs like JAX-RS CDI, which we'll see in a second. And if I have a look into my domain, that is a coffee order that has some like type, some status, and so on. And you see that I can map this declaratively from JSON into my domain here. And then I basically say, well, just order some coffee, and it will just store it for now just in memory. This is also a CDI bean, right? You can add inject everything here, so there are no surprises here. And then we order some coffee. Okay, so that's basically it for the domain here. And I run this example, and then I can already do some things here. Now, what's already interesting is how that is being built. And also, let's stop this again. What is one thing where Quarkus really shines, I think, is the developer experience and the workflows we can build. So if I would change some code here, right, what would I need to do in order to see the change being reflected while developing, right? Well, I would need to rebuild it and then restart it, which is too slow, actually, to be honest. Why? Because it takes a few seconds, right? If I do the Maven build again, that was like 6 or 8 seconds, right, and then start it up, that is too slow. But what I can do, I can run this Quarkus :dev mode for the development mode that comes from this Quarkus plugin. And what it does, it starts up my application in the development mode, where it will listen to some changes, and where I can just say, okay, now I get the same coffee orders again. But if I change something, then the change will be there right away. So let's do this. Let's change something here. What I will write is just some health check. So what Quarkus supports is the microprofile health checking. That comes in handy later, because later we will do some Docker and some Kubernetes stuff. So what we will do, we include a readiness health check. That is also an application scoped bean, and this implements some microprofile API, actually, some health check here. And then let's implement this. Yes. And this is going to be a default health check response up. That is called coffee shop. So that's basically it. And then what we can do, we can actually reload this already, because what it will do, it will see the changes and quite quickly just restart my application. So orders don't have any changes here, but if I go to health check, then it shows me this health check here. That is a known URL for the health check of the coffee shop. Now let's change something more interesting. If I say, let's build up a named health check with, for example, some data, hello world, right? And then we change this on the fly. Then if I invoke this URL again, then I see if I'm, down, of course it should not be down, it should be up, right? So I can change this again, then it's actually not down and server is unavailable, but 200 okay. Now the status is up again and I have some data, hello world. Or of course, if I say, let's try this out, Привет, right? And then we should see this as well. Okay, works. Actually, you would not believe how hard it is to type on a Cyrillic keyboard if you never learned it to. So because every letter is different, but that's another issue. So that is something that is already quite helpful. Why? Because of the quick developer experience while we are coding. So we don't have to wait for this turnaround. Because I can just make some changes and see the changes right there. I don't get distracted by just these waiting times. And let's include something else. Let's include some quick configuration, because also what works, if I say I want to inject some configuration, microprofile config is also supported. And then, for example, I can say, I want to have some string, some version string that I inject from somewhere. And then I can put this here as well. If I say, okay, I want to have, for example, the application version, I want to include this into my health check. And then I see this one being reflected as well. So now the coffee shop is up and has the version 1.23. If you wonder where this comes from these properties. application properties. That's the way how to configure a Quarkus application. So this is also quite straightforward. We can just put something in here, and then this will be accessible, and we can inject our configuration. Also, what's quite nice, this development mode will also listen to changes in my config. So because, well, it assumes that if I make changes there, I can also see the changes while doing local development. So that's quite helpful as well, just to see what's going on here. All right, then let's do a little bit more of live coding, a little bit more interesting stuff. What we can also have is our coffee. We can configure that a little bit. So finally, let's actually create some coffee, right? I have some coffee order that I can post to this resource. So if enough of health checking, let's get some coffee. If I look into the orders, that's still empty, and that's not acceptable. We need some coffee, especially if it's morning. Then we want to post something. So in order to create a coffee, I will just post something to this URL. So that's quite straightforward. And what we do, we say espresso. We want to include some coffee of type espresso. That's going to be here. The coffee shop that has, not the coffee shop, the coffee order has a coffee type, which has like different drink types available. That's part of our domain. And then we can create an espresso, and then hopefully this coffee will be in the system. Okay. Here showed us. Let's create a latte. And now we have another coffee. Okay. Now we see that this works, and right now that is only in memory. We will change this later on. But first, let's also include something that we've seen in the domain. We also have some price that can be configured. So let's have this here. Because for now, I showed you how to include, well, this REST mapping, right? That's called JAX-RS with these standards. And we have some CDI with the injection. That will be the dependency injection here. So all of these standards that are known work in Quarkus as well. And if you know what is called microprofile config, then you will know what this is. So this annotation will inject our configuration here. But also this works if we say we want to configure something in a dynamic way. For example, if I have my coffee shop and I have my coffee order here, I can set a price. So for example, I can say, well, order set price to something, right? So this sets the price. By the way, in real world, never do money calculations with floating point numbers. That's a bad idea. Use a proper type like a big decimal. So this is just an example. Don't do this at home. And but what we can have, we can calculate the price depending on the coffee type, right? Like espresso is cheaper than latte and all these things. So what we will do, we will create a new class for calculating the price. So again, the live coding is still working in the background. We can keep that working. If it breaks, that doesn't hurt. It will just try again and try again. We call this prices, price calculator. It's always a hard word to type. It's going to also be an application scoped bean. And while we say, actually, we can inject it here to say that's our price calculator. And then we go here and say, well, please calculate the price, calculate for the order. So let's do this, and we can create a method right here and say, okay, now I actually, well, depending on the price, I want to say, well, order get type. Depending on the type, I can, let's say, get configured price, because that should be configured in the configuration that we've seen here. And if I create this method, then it can actually just look up something here. What I can do, I can call what is called a config provider and get the config to get this programmatically. So this works in microprofile config, and it also works in Quarkus. If I say get value for a property name, and then I can build this programmatically. I can, for example, say, let's have a quick look. Coffee.prices. Well, whatever the type is, will be this. So let's say coffee. Did I say coffee or coffees? My memory is really bad. Coffee.prices, yes, dot something. dot is the type name to lowercase. Let's outsource this into a variable. That's going to be the key. And this is going to be a lookup with, in this case, a double. So now we have to do this programmatically, but then we basically get the price by doing so. And well, let's see, that should actually already work. So please shout if I made a mistake, or actually our program will tell us. So if I say, please get me the orders, now you will see that the orders is empty again. Why? Because in this development mode, the application has been restarted. So everything is gone. But I can post some coffee again. Let's post some latte and let's post some espresso. And let's see what's going on. So both work here. And if I say, okay, please get this individual coffee, then we see, okay, great, that's price 150. And if we get the other one, if I say, okay, now return this one, then we get, okay, €3 or dollars, or whether or not that is expensive. And now you see that this is how we can make some configuration changes to get some config dynamically. But also what I wanted to show you is that you actually just can keep coding and make mistakes and make compile errors while the development mode is running in the background. All right, so for this first thing, how to get started, are there any questions already? So if you have a look, Baruch will monitor the chat. Just questions. Okay, then let's do the second round. A lot of questions. Okay.
And there are some very interesting numbers for me to share it with you.
Okay.
As you might expect, 86% of the people in the chat actually use Spring for their Java enterprise development. 1% uses J2EE. Seriously, we need to have a talk with those people. 3% uses Java in Jakarta, 3% uses Quarkus, and 3% uses plain Java and Servlet, and 4% uses other. So this is that. Obviously, Spring is controlling the market. We're going to talk about that in a second. Familiarity with Quarkus, about half and half, never heard about it and seen it. 70% tried it before, and 2% actually use it in production, which is surprising and interesting. What else? For application startup, it's all over the place. It's kind of a very nice bell curve. 13%, 2 to 10 seconds, 28%, around 25%, both 11 to 30 and 3 minutes to 10 minutes. The majority, 35, is from half a minute to 3 minutes, and there are 3% that probably uses. Those are the people that use J2E, I guess, more than 10 minutes. So yeah, that's like a perfect curve. What else did we ask? How long does their application start, rebuild, restart on your development environment? And here, obviously, the results are a little bit different. 2 to 10 seconds, 30%, 11 to 20, 25, 20 to 60, 25, and then another like probably 30%. We're talking about minutes, 1, 2, 3 to 10, etc. So basically, I would say that's probably relating to the first poll. Spring is making life of a lot of people pretty easy, right? The startups are decent, the reloads are decent, and that brings me to the first question. If I replace your face with face of Evgeny Borisov and replace some strings in the import, I'm getting the exactly same Jagru meetup about how to get started with Spring Boot.
Yep.
So my first question is,
yes.
What is the difference? Why we need another Spring Boot in our lives? And basically, what's wrong with Spring Boot as we know and like it?
That is a very good question. So I would actually place the question differently. I would not say what's wrong with Spring Boot, because I think it's a great technology, and I've used it myself. So that's pretty much a little bit up to taste, which APIs you like more or which imports, so to say. What does Quarkus bring to the table? What Spring Boot doesn't? So if you look at the website, and what is very often, what Quarkus is very often like sold as, is basically that you can run applications in a native way. We have to talk about that as well, because I would say that's not even the main point, but basically what it enables you to do is to boil down everything that you run in your application while you're building it at build time. So if you look at the website, it shows quite nicely some comparison in mostly in resource consumption, what you do. So when they write traditional cloud native stack, they basically mean a Spring application. And if you run Quarkus in that JVM mode, like basically I did with the normal build, then you already save up to like half of the resource consumption. And especially if you boil it down to native images with GraalVM and Substrat VM, you can get like way smaller. Now you could say, okay, RAM is cheap. Actually, I don't care if it's 100 meg or 12 meg or if it's just 10% or something like that. Well, yes, but also in times of cloud, we actually pay for memory, right? So, I mean, I work for a cloud provider. So I probably should not say that because they're happy if you pay a lot. But for customers, this really makes a difference, because if you say you can run like the same number of instances or the same number of workload, or actually a higher number of workload on the same workload or even on less, then you save a lot of money, especially if you have like big deployments. If you have one app, it doesn't matter that much. But if you have many running instances, then you actually save a lot of time. But I want to focus a little bit more on the build time optimization. So basically what happens, let me stop this again, when you run Maven package. So what it does, basically, and now you have to think how all of the runtimes work. Like it doesn't matter if it's a J2EE application server or a EE application server, even Spring Boot. Basically, when you start your application, the framework or the runtime, it searches for all the things you put together, right? So all of these nice annotations like are very handy for us developers. They're great. But for the framework, it's really bad. Why? Because it's a lot of indirection, right? I specify I throw some annotation on it at path, right? Or at Spring REST controller or at something. And then, just like fairy dust, it just magically happens that this now becomes an HTTP resource. But what the runtime has to do, usually at runtime, is to go and search for all of these annotations and then put it all together again, what you just declaratively specified as a developer. Now, but this is what happens at build time. Why? Because that what Quarkus does here at build time will already prepare everything and do some what is called tree shaking, like throw away all the resources that you actually won't need afterwards anyway, which takes a few seconds here. So this adds up, I don't know, like a few tiny seconds to your build time. But then what you get out of it is a highly optimized Java code. It's basically, you get rid of all of the reflection and all of the indirection, all of what is called inversion of control. You get rid of it and you replace it with actual code, as if you wrote your application, from scratch, including all of the actual Java method invocations and not indirection and reflection, basically. And this saves you a lot, even in JVM mode. So I'm actually, for a few reasons, and we will talk about this and some DevOps and some other things later, but already the JVM mode, just running this application like I did, saves you a lot in resource consumption and also startup time. So what we see here, and my laptop is already a bunch of years old, but even on this one, it started up quite quickly, just to get the first response. And if you compare it with some Spring Stack, this basically adds a lot. Plus that developer experience with this development mode. It also works in Spring. It's not as nicely, you think I have to configure a little bit more. But that is also something that's really beneficial while you're developing. I mean, it's really fun to just use it and change something while developing, and then see the changes immediately being reflected. So I think that is these are the main things that the Quarkus brings to the table, and why developers should care about it.
Nice. So we will get back to the question how developer mode works, but to make it more interesting, so obviously why it's better than Spring Boot was an easy question, and now come the hard one: how it is better than Micronaut, which
Oh, yeah.
it looks very similar. It gives exactly the same advantages, and they actually list the same advantages over Spring Boot and over Quarkus on their website as well.
Yes, yes. Well, the benefits over Micronaut. So what Micronaut does, at least in its initial version, is that it comes with its own API. You know, you have like also some REST APIs, some slightly different annotations, and you can build your applications in that if you want to. But compared to both Spring and the more Java Enterprise world, it does not support as many features, especially if you compare it, well, actually both to Spring and Quarkus. So the support of what I would call, a reasonable or a more at least 95% of the use cases application is covered really well by both Spring and both Quarkus. So this is what I found quite surprising with Quarkus. A little bit more than a year ago when they announced it, the first version, it already came with a lot of stuff. So I found this really interesting that it's not just a toy, and it's not just a proof of concept. Like from day one when it was out there, you could already build reasonable applications. It has it had persistent support. It had support for all this JAX REST and CDI. It could do reasonable things. And even now, what basically Quarkus does, it does not support all of the Java EE APIs, because let's face it, you don't need all of them and you don't care about a lot of them, and whether you want to do EJBs or whatever. But Quarkus substitutes the things that you would like to have with pragmatic substitutions. Like EJBs, for example, have some schedules annotation, which is a very nice feature, and Quarkus has its own scheduled annotation that looks very similar. So it fills these gaps. But compared to Micronaut, it comes with many more features, and you can have a look at the guides and at the features and dependencies list there. So pretty much everything you need for a daily work and daily application is supported there. So that makes sense. My comparison to Micronaut.
Yeah. Okay. So fair enough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One, I think, more of a conceptual question, and then a couple of very hands-on question. The conceptual one is, how difficult is it to migrate from, let's say, Java E7 to Quarkus? Or we can broaden the scope and speak about how it is to migrate from everything else, from Spring, from whatever people use.
Yes, that's a very good question. So I can say, because I actually migrated a few real-world applications, mostly for fun, and to see whether that's possible, to Quarkus. And basically, if you have a look at what I showed you in the code, most of the things are already either supported or very well known for EE developers, because all of these standards and APIs are the same. In general, the closer you are to a standard EE, or the closer you have been to a standard EE solution, the easier it is, right? As always with the migration. So if you didn't use any vendor-specific APIs, and especially if you don't have many APIs that are not supported in Quarkus, which are mainly EJBs, they are not supported. You can replace them with some others, but then of course you have to do some work. And not all CDI features are supported. The pragmatic things you'd probably need, they are supported, and if you do some extra magic complex stuff, then it's a question how easy it is to migrate. But the less you have these, then it's pretty straightforward. When it comes to configure your application, you will always have to migrate some things also from Spring, of course. So with this properties approach, which is, well, it's quite straightforward. So you could probably list all of your configuration right there. That would be the thing how to do in Quarkus. From my experience, if you migrate, you will probably save a lot of code. But of course, the more not complex, but the more special things you have, the more work you will have to do in order to migrate. When it comes, that's for EE. When it comes to Spring, it also depends a little bit how much, how much special own code, custom code you have, because Quarkus does support. I would be a little bit cautious when I say support. Support Spring. What Quarkus does, it maps the well-known, the most important annotations in Spring to the concept in CDI or in Quarkus actually. So, for example, this application scope, is like another singleton scope bean, like Spring would have with at service or at component. So these are basically mappable one-to-one, and then you can map, probably a lot of the code, like more than 80 or 90% of your project's code. But I have not done this myself, like migrating a Spring application without changing much code to Quarkus. So some things are supported, but then I would, see what works out of the box. So in the worst case, if you want to migrate Spring to Quarkus, then you would have to rewrite the configuration pieces that you would do with Spring Boot with these annotations as of today, just to some Quarkus concept, which mostly means change some annotations basically, and that's pretty much it. With the integration work, you would need to see, because Spring Boot integrates a lot of things, right? Like when it comes to some infrastructure means or security or whatever, you would see how to migrate that to another more modern cloud stack, for example, with your cloud provider or whatever you use. But that's basically it, what you would need to migrate. So it's definitely possible. And especially if you have an existing EE stack like EE7, that should be, or I can say this because I've done that, that would in most cases be quite straightforward.
Yeah, that's very nice to hear, because obviously, it's only me and you that have the luxury of starting from scratch. Most of the people have existing code that they need to battle with. Okay, more polls are coming in. The question, what do you do while your application redeploys? The answer are, as expected, all over the place. People drink coffee, drink vodka, mostly social media though, but also doing emails and chatting with colleagues and everything. In terms of how you run your Java application, 30%, the most of the people actually deploy in Kubernetes. Surprisingly, 23%, very high for me, I think, use Docker Compose, which is kind of weird, but okay. Yeah, and then about 15% doing jar files in virtual machines, 12% doing War EAR on application servers, 6% do OpenShift. So yeah, again, all over the place. Kubernetes is leading, and Docker Compose. It's hard for me to trust the 23% run production applications in Docker Compose, but okay. Another one. Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Okay.
Another one is how people decide on technologies. No surprises here, I think. Almost 60% do it with consensus with others, and then 20% can decide by themselves, and 20% can't decide by themselves, which goes right into the importance of developer relations and how it is developers' market to decide what technologies to use. I think all the industry by now kind of recognizes it. Couple of more questions, which are more like probably implementation details. First of all, regarding the development mode, I think everybody got it correctly, just to make sure. It is still recompiles and restarts the application in development mode, right?
Yes, and that's a very good question. So what it does, it recompiles on the fly, like everything that has been changed, but it always will redeploy your application. Because first of all, just because it's fast enough, right? You don't have to care whether it's just like parts of it or individual classes, and you will. Because I know this because I talked to some engineers. In most of the cases, you will come up with a more consistent result if you say, okay, don't bother swapping individual classes, because what happens if you have some beans that do have some state and some are differently scoped than others? So it's just easier to wipe it and redeploy your whole application, what you saw before. So my coffee was gone, and then it will do just this. So we can start this again, actually. Quarkus. That's a good point. So it listens to your code files, and then we'll just like do this redeployment. What it also does, which I think is pretty cool, it out of the box listens to the debug port. So actually you can do make some debug, which I will show in a second as well. But that's basically what the development mode does for you. So it does some class reloading magic under the hood, but basically what you have to know, it restarts the application each time that happens.
Yep.
So we'll show a little bit
and I
more.
think,
Hmm?
yeah. While we wait, the last question for this block is you saw dependency injection into methods, and you showed, and someone asked if the constructor injection supports as well.
Yes, it is. That's a CDI feature. So in CDI, you can do also constructor-based injection. I know that many people prefer this. I just don't do it because I usually don't care and I'm lazy. So for me, it's a little bit less code. I save like one method, the constructor. But yeah, you can do that as well. And in this case, you can actually have a look at the guides. They're in general quite helpful. Quarkus even supports some more, not standard features in CDI. Or context, where is it? Context and dependency injection. So this guide will show you what is like a non-standard features. So it's actually even easier, easier. You save like one annotation in a few cases. You can inject some things. I think you can inject even some constructor without specifying like the inject all the time. So if you're bean matches and things like that. So there's a little bit of syntactical sugar involved, but yes, it works. You can do constructor-based injection as well. So that's in general, that was always a CDI feature.
Yeah, I mean the discussion of should we do construct injection or property method injection can go forever. Here's an interesting question. Anton Arkhipov, he used to be product for JRebel, which obviously took another approach to hot reload, not restarting, but actually patching classes on the fly. And what he very reasonably claims is that it's fine, the auto restart is fine as long as the start is fast enough. But if you have 2,000 classes and state that need to be initiated, maybe some preheat of caches, maybe some data loads, the hello world startups start times are not applicable anymore. And then the question is, does it really hold water, the whole idea of let's restart everything for every little change?
Yes, that's actually a good point from my, and he's absolutely right. From my experience, it's actually not that much the number of classes, like in Quarkus, number of classes, but already if you include some persistence and of course like some caches, because then you would need to do more when restarting, like reloading things and heating up caches. Yes, that can become a thing where you actually have to wait longer, at least up to a few seconds. That was the worst example I had with Quarkus now. If that is not enough, so especially if you have like a huge application or actually have to wait on some external things or some caches, then it might actually help to go with different approaches to say you do not restart it, but you point some. I mean, right now there or as of today there are multiple ways to do this, right? Like even your IDE can do a lot of like hot swapping of in debug mode, for example, which is not as consistent as restarting everything, of course, but in many cases it gets you a faster result than just restarting everything. Then this might make more sense for you. Yes. So like JRebel is one example, obviously, but also I had quite good success with some plain Java applications with the debug mode of IntelliJ. So that can also hot swap stuff on the fly, but then it really depends on the type of the change, like what you actually change in your class files and how you change the class construct or not, at least from my point of view, but I'm certainly not an expert on that field. But this is what I would, so if somebody has that problem, where I would look into it, like where I would start investigating.
Yeah, I would say one of the reasons why we care less those days is obviously microservices. We actually write smaller applications that by definition should start faster, and that's because 12-factor app, that's because running in the cloud, that's because we cannot allow ourselves having applications which start slow because of the cloud. So we kind of got into this situation when we have fast starting applications, not because of the reload, but then reload is simplified because we really don't care because the startup is so fast for other reasons.
Yes, yes, exactly. And that's actually a topic where I want to continue and emphasize a little bit more. So going back to the poll question, like what people do while waiting for redeployment, and especially not only the production redeployment, but also redeploying, or especially redeploying while developing. This is a really, really big one for me. Also a topic of my interest, like how to be more productive while working, and especially because we're humans and we just get distracted, right? Especially by social media and checking emails, right? That is just the worst thing to do. Like, it's better to make some coffee because, then you just drink some coffee and then you continue. But what happens if you go to social media and email, you just get distracted, right? So if you redeploy and you start your test, and if you have to wait for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, then it's over. Because of course I will open up my email program and then I see this new email, and then I have this context switch, and I get this question of, oh, and now let me just reply on it, and your focus and your attention is gone, right?
Yeah.
So this is actually what I want to
come back
fight.
to your code in like 10 minutes at best. Yeah, for sure. So there are tons of other questions. People really love the stuff that you are doing in our Q&A, but I think I will postpone it to the next block, and we will get back to some code now.
Sounds good. Yes. Yeah, and especially on this topic, like how to especially get fast feedback, that is a really, really important thing. And in general, it's not about the technology, with any technology, and it's actually possible with any technology. If you do Spring, they also have a dev mode. If you do plain Java, you can use some hard reload functionality. But in general, it's just that way of saying you make a change. And then what happens, how long do you have to wait until you get some feedback? And the feedback usually means, okay, do you see whether your change works or not? And now I just changed things on the fly and tested it manually. But testing is actually a good point, because I have two type of tests here, just as a very, very basic example.
Sorry for interrupting again.
Yeah.
One more comment that I forgot to mention. We see a second cursor on your screen, and we try to debug from which of the levels of the translation it comes. Might it be? Yes. Thank you very much for getting rid of it. Perfect.
Oh, interesting. That was shared from this one. Okay. Yeah. Sorry for that. I have a bunch of computers here, and all of them have annoying cursors. Which is fun fact. I actually built up a keyboard shortcut to move my cursor out of the way because it's so annoying. So, that's another thing. Use your keyboard and you'll be more productive. So now to the testing. I have like one very boring unit test that I can just run here, which of course, oops, that was the wrong, this one was the wrong keyboard shortcut. Oh God, how do I get rid of this now? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, that didn't work as expected here. Okay, let's run the test here from the command line. So basically what happens if you do a Maven package or a Maven clean package, then Maven per default has this test phase that just runs your, typically they're called unit tests, your surefire tests, which is one here. And well, the whole topic of testing is a whole on its own, and I produced some video courses that you can watch for free on that, like how to be more effective while testing. So that is one fast feedback that you already should get. Anything that you can do on a code level. So basically, that is just testing some deserializer with some different input and output, a parameterized JUnit test. So that is, we can talk about this, but also in the past I did a Jacques Roux talk on effective testing. But what's more interesting, and this is actually important for your fast feedback, is basically something that you could call system test or more integrative test on a system level. So basically a test that already connects to your running application. Which means I have an application running here. Well, actually it's not running, but in a second. That runs locally, my Quarkus application. And now when I want to run this test, which is an IT integration test, so that's also a convention. So this is why it's actually not executed by Maven. or not by Maven Surefire. That's a failsafe test. Sorry for my completed Java 12. I don't know what's wrong with my IntelliJ. Was 1 second. Let's change the settings. This would actually work, I think, because of the latest Java version I was using, 14, of course. This might be the issue here. So let's try this again. And what it does, but also if that fails, we can run it from the command line. It connects against the application that is already running. And the point here that I want to make is how to build up this test that it's actually provides fast feedback, right? Because besides, I asked about application startup in the polls, but besides the starting up of the application, testing your application is also what takes a long time in your build pipeline typically. So I asked before in presentations, how long a build takes, and it's also minutes for Maven builds, which is just way too slow. And what this way of testing does, it actually connects to an application that is already running. So while you're running your test, and I can rerun it again real quick, it just connects to something that is already running, so you get immediate feedback. It's already done. It's not just starting up something that you have to wait for, but it's already there. One fails. Why? Because it checks for, well, whether your system is up and running. Is system up? That checks for the health check. And yes, that's true. And it also checks the version, whether it equals to 1.2.3. But now we changed it. If you remember, it's now 1.2.4. And I just simply restart the test, and then I see the result. And now that's a very, very basic setup, but I think it already shows the essence, what you have to do. While developing, you should build up a environment, whatever technology you use, that really doesn't matter, but a environment where you can quickly make changes and immediately see the changes being reflected, whether it's in running code live or in your test. So for example, if I go back to the properties and say I change back to from 1.2.3 or 1.2.4 to 1.2.3, and if I go to my health check here, then you saw it before, I immediately see these changes. But also in the same way, because manual testing is boring, if I say I want to just rerun my test, I do this in the same way. It connects to the application that just got changed real quick, and then I see the results being reflected here, and I can say, okay, now please change it back and run the test again. So you always have this fast feedback loop of whatever you change, you get immediate feedback, also on this system test level. And that is actually an important point for regardless of the technology. So I actually see Spring projects and Java Enterprise projects have the same problems here, because in Spring you would use something like Spring tests, right? These Spring context tests. And in Quarkus this also exists. There is an annotation at Quarkus test. But in most of the cases, I'm not a fan of this way of running tests at all, because what it does, it always starts up your application. And if you use Spring, well, Spring starts up quite quickly and Quarkus starts up quickly, but it's always like 5 seconds or a little bit more depending what you do. And you have to add all of these, 5 seconds each and every time you want to test something. And for me, it sounds like a luxury problem, but waiting these 5 seconds each and every time is actually too slow, or be it 10 seconds, right? And then you always have to wait. But in this case, I just want to can run it again. I want to immediately execute something and get this immediate feedback. Just for to clarify these different scopes, what it does, and I did not configure anything that's actually a Maven convention, IT for integration test. If I want to run, let's open up a new terminal. If I want to run this test in my that is the way how to run these integration tests with failsafe if you want to run it in Maven. So that does not execute your Surefire, your unit tests, but only the integration tests here. And that basically runs this IT and also now works, and you will see the same error if it fails here if you want to do it on the command line. So that also works, but the point here really is to write a test that just executes quickly. So in my case, I'm a really big fan of plain JUnit tests. They run really, really quickly. You can run hundreds of tests in no time. And what this does, that is just an abstraction, a delegate, if you want, a lower abstraction level, how you execute your tests. So if you say, well, is system up? What should it actually do? It goes against my health check and sees, well, is it actually the status up? Or get the application version and things like that, right? Like proper layers of abstraction that just make the test code easier to write and easier to read. And again, this executes very quickly. So I think this is a very important point when building up testing in general and how to execute this quickly. Okay, now if you say, well, that's a nice, an easy, cute example for just Hello World, but what happens if I have a more, sophisticated way? Well, after some quick break, I will introduce some persistence as well, but I can already point you to some video and additional resources that you'll also get later on, the links where I actually show how to run a more sophisticated environment. So what you can do with Quarkus and with some other technology, you can actually run your Quarkus application in the development mode in a Docker container or even remotely somewhere, while having still this hard redeploy approach and this seeing the changes immediately being reflected. So I will point you to some resources there later on, but that also works if you say, for example, you not only have your coffee shop application, but your coffee shop that connects to a database and to something else, and you run this in this debug and hot redeploy development mode, and so on and so forth. And that is really helpful because it's just, it builds up all that stuff very, very quickly. If we check this debug mode here, what I announced before, again, real quick, we can actually say, I hope this works here, or we have to configure it real quick. So basically what you can do in your IDE, you can attach to this remote debug to this, there it is, to this port here. And then if I start this here, then it will connect to this resource, to this remotely running resource. And if I then say, okay, actually, let's set some breakpoint here, Control F8. I recently changed my keyboard layout, so now I'm a little bit confused here. And what I can do if I now get the orders from either my command line or actually a test, then I can just execute this, and then I will be caught in the breakpoint here, and then I can actually just inspect some stuff. Both if I invoke my application from the outside, and even more helpful if I invoke it from within that system test, and then I can just see, okay, what's going on, and then execute and debug and see what's happening in your running application. And just that this is active out of the box is actually quite helpful from my experience, and just to get faster feedback. All right, now I would say let's have a quick look at the questions, and then I think we have time for a quick break.
It will be a good time to switch at break. Let's do it the other way around. Let's do the break first. People will ask more questions, and then we'll start with a bunch of questions after we are back.
That sounds good.
Окей, с вами снова я, Алексей Федоров, и я тут сделал маленький опросик. Как вы видите, у меня тут вот некая картина есть. Это на самом деле картина Вася Ложкина, причем это оригинал. Вот так вот я сейчас вам покажу, и там написано, что? Написано, потому что сегодня праздник. А кто из нас знает, что за праздник у нас тут с вами на дворе у джавистов, а? Есть такие люди, кто знает, что за праздник у джавистов? У джавистов на самом деле очень большой праздник. В эти дни Java 25. И очень круто, что технология растет, развивается. Вот я в свое время тоже когда-то писал на Java, сейчас я пишу в Java только в каких-то таких развлекательных целях, и в основном я использую там Java 8, Java 11, у меня там на разных проектах разные, а Java уже настолько ушла вперед, что я уже, честно говоря, не успеваю следить за тем, что происходит, и вот даже опросники, которые мы сейчас задаем в чате, и их результаты, которые Барух озвучивает Себастину, говорят о том, что технологий стало очень много, то, что мы раньше делали на одних технологиях, сейчас мы делаем совершенно на других, и это очень круто. Все меняется, Java 25, Java по-прежнему впереди планеты всей, и я думаю, я надеюсь, что будет расти и развиваться. Мы все поздравляем и Java, и вас всех с тем, что вот такой у нас замечательный юбилей. А теперь я хочу передать слово моей коллеге Наташе Гительсон, которая представит наших замечательных спонсоров Meetup.
Всем привет, я Наташа, и я хочу рассказать о партнерах, которые уже не первый год поддерживают наши конференции. Это компания Allworks и Infobip. Прямо сейчас у нас на связи Рома Гагарский из компании Almworks. Их команда разрабатывает плагин Jira. И мы, кстати, в Jukru Group его активно используем. Рома, привет!
Наташа, привет, привет всем. Да, действительно, я из Almworks. Мы небольшая продуктовая компания в Санкт-Петербурге. Специализируемся на продуктах для управления проектами. И основные из них, да, действительно работают в экосистеме Atlassian, добавляя функционал к таким большим продуктам, как Jira и Confluence, с которым, наверное, большинство из вас сталкивались. А среди наших клиентов есть такие громкие имена, как Twitter, eBay, PayPal, вот Jukru, конечно же. Вот недавно мы запустили новый облачный продукт, который добавил новых интересных задач как разработчикам, так и админам. Если интересно узнать больше, как мы устроены изнутри, пишите, будем рады познакомиться. На этом хорошего всем митапа и вечера. Давайте смотреть дальше.
Большое спасибо, Рома. Ребята, если вы хотите пообщаться о разработке на платформах Atlassian, либо просто поболтать с разработчиками Almworks, то пишите им на электронку. Все контакты вы найдете внизу под видео. И второй наш партнер – это компания Infobip. Это компания, которая фокусируется на разработке решений для коммуникаций. Прямо сейчас у нас на связи Мухаммед Каранашев. Мухаммед, привет!
Всем привет, меня зовут Мухаммед Карнашев, я работаю в компании Infobip. Мы разрабатываем SaaS-решение, которое позволяет бизнесам доставлять сообщения своим клиентам через любой канал связи, на любое устройство в любой точке мира. Каналы связи – это, например, смс-ки, пуши, e-mail, сообщения в разнообразных мессенджерах. Кроме этого, наш продукт генерирует разные отчеты, помогает клиентам анализировать эффективность их трафика, например, производить АБ-тестирование. На нашей платформе работают, например, пуши от Uber при приезде такси, смс-ки от Райффайзена при приходе зарплаты, одноразовые коды для двухфакторной авторизации, аутентификации при логине ВКонтакте. Всего разных клиентов из разных сфер бизнеса у нас около 250 тысяч сейчас. Обрабатываем мы 7 миллиардов сообщений в месяц, но хочется, конечно, больше, быстрее и надежнее. Поэтому нам нужны люди. С чем мы работаем? Наш стек базируется в основном в Java экосистеме. Пишем мы на 11 Java, на Kotlin, храним данные в Redis, в Ignite, в Hazelcast, в Cassandra, в ClickHouse, где только не храним. Пересылаем данные мы между всей этой инфраструктурой с помощью Kafka. При этом команды достаточно автономные, могут сами выбирать используемые технологии. Так у нас есть несколько .NET команд. Пишем мы фронтенд, то есть возможность развития по фронту. Из-за коронавируса работы стало только больше, так как мы предоставляем медучреждениям России и других стран СНГ бесплатный доступ к своей платформе для информирования граждан о ситуации, связанной с пандемией. В общем, есть чем заняться. Присоединяйтесь к нашей команде, ссылки на вакансии и контакты в описании. Всем хорошего митапа.
Большое спасибо, Мухаммед. Ну, как Мухаммед и верно заметил, что если вы хотите пообщаться с ребятами из Инфобипа, то все ссылочки вы найдете внизу в описании к видео. На этом у нас все. Хорошего вам митапа.
Наташа, большое спасибо. Говорят, что у нас тут фантастически быстрые рекламные перерывы, поэтому, поскольку у нас еще есть пара минут, я воспользуюсь случаем и снова прорекламирую вам конференции, которые у нас будут в ближайшее время. Мы выйдем в эфир, в такой большой эфир 15 июня. Первыми, по-моему, я сейчас могу ошибаться, у нас конференция по тестированию Gizenbug и конференция по .NET .Next. И вот прямо сейчас параллельно на том же сайте Meetup Jukru.org у нас идет шоу «Ошибка выжившего». Там у нас Артем Ярошенко и Сева Брекелов делают что-то по тестированию, рассказывают какие-то штуки, фичи, что там у них интересного в тестировании. Если вам, дорогие мои друзья джависты, интересно, что там у тестировщиков, что там в DevOps, что там многопоточные и распределенные разработки и так далее. Специально для вас у нас есть замечательный билетик Full Pass, который дает доступ на онлайн всех наших ближайших 8 конференций. Конференции начнутся 15 июня, закончатся, кажется, 10 июля. Будет 4 недели адского стриминга от Jukru Group. Ну чего, возвращаемся назад к делу. Gentlemen, welcome back to live broadcast and let's continue the show.
Welcome back, Sebastian, and let's go to our questions. And as I mentioned, there are a lot. So the first question about testing, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm missing something. Why it is even required? But someone asked, how do you test your applications in the native mode? Can you compile them to native applications and then test them?
Yes. That's a simple answer. So it depends what type of test you want to run. I think the only answer to the question that really makes sense is to have something like a system test or an integrative test of having a running application and then you connect to it, because anything code level does not exist anymore when it's in native code, right? So you cannot have a unit test, native mode. That doesn't make sense. But yes, of course you can. So with basically something like what I showed before with this type of system test here, where is it? That would be the type of test that you also then can run and actually should run against your native image, because that is what you how you ensure that the image behaves in the same way like your JVM mode. I want to talk a little bit about that later as well. But basically, yeah, once you build down something to native, you should actually test it using the same system tests as well. Yeah.
Nice. All right. There are some questions about reactive, the reactive library, and their implementation in Quarkus. Tell me if now it's a good time, or you're going to show some of it, so we'll ask them later.
Now is a good time actually, because in this demo I did not include the reactive stuff because I will want to show a few other things. Basically, yes, Quarkus supports a few reactive things if you want. So under the hood, it uses Vertex for all of the threat handling and all of this things. And I'm just looking what is the best guide to show something here, because there are many things that you actually can connect to within your code, which is quite nice. You can have something like a virtual, if you want, streams that you can connect to, and that you can also, let's just search for it. Reactive routes maybe. So I'm just thinking about what is the best guide to show some examples here. So maybe this one with reactive messaging, where I can actually using some annotations like incoming and outgoing connect to something that is like a stream, either an actual resource like a Kafka a topic that you connect to, or AIMQP, or whatever you want to have, and use this within your application. So this integrates, well, I would say quite pragmatically, because not all of them, or actually not many of the EE standards support some reactive paradigms as of today. But Quarkus tries to fill in these gaps that you can also have some code support, basically, support this within your application, and then connect to them. So here's some example that basically says, okay, this can act somewhat as some glue code, where you have some incoming and outgoing stream to some, I don't know where this comes from. Yeah, some AIMQP queue, for example, or some Kafka topic, and then just stream them through using this connector. So yes, this works in Quarkus. I don't have a overview in my head with all of the things that are supported, but definitely Kafka streams, reactive streams, AIMQP, and I think the most important building blocks you would use there. So yes, reactive is definitely supported, and also the way how Quarkus is built internally, like on top of this Vertex, makes sense, I would say, to use these workloads.
Yeah, and that what you showed brings another question that actually a couple of people asked. It looks like there is an entire zoo of reactive libraries with frankly different execution models which are in play, right? So there is Mutiny and Vertex, and there is Java that is used under the hood, and then completable futures and Reactor. They are available within mappers, and all of them have different execution models: blocking, non-blocking, for joint pools, and back pressure, and with and without, and what's not. Is there an idiomatic way to work reactive with Quarkus?
An idiomatic way. Well, yeah, that's you mentioned a few really good points, especially the different execution models and whether you have support for back pressure and all that. And yeah, of course, this needs to be handled. What I found I have not looked into all of them, but what I found quite helpful was this way how Quarkus implements them or enables them using basically these declarative APIs that are somewhat standard and somewhat just Quarkus specific, where they're trying to somewhat encapsulate these building blocks that you have some glue code if you want to connect to them. You definitely have to look into like this documentation in detail, what that means for especially connecting like two different approaches or two different execution models, whether all of the like details and behavior are supported. But that's basically what I would somewhat see as the best practice or the go-to way to start with. So especially these guides, I have found them quite useful. I would look into them first.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I think that's pretty much all for now. Let
Yes.
me see if there. Well, no, there are a couple of more. Uh, question kind of related to that about libraries that do pretty much the same. For example, HTTP request handling. There are libraries in Quarkus that allow you different ways to do the same. So again, how do you select the canonical, the idiomatic one?
Which specifically? So when I talk about request handling, do they mean like you could do some Vertex HTTP mapping or JAX-RS or some servlets, or do they
Yeah,
refer to this probably? Okay.
yeah,
Then what I would personally do then, but that really also depends on your team. What basically, in this way, it's a question which APIs to use when you have multiple choices. Then I would use what is the closest to a standard, quote unquote, or what you or your team are familiar with. So for example, with HTTP handling, then I would personally use JAX-RS because it's widely supported, widely known, and it's a standard. And you only need some more lower level APIs if you have some more special requirements that is not supported. But it also, depends. If you're super familiar and happy with the Vertex API and, you have used it for years, then why not just use that, right? And if you're more productive with that. So I would answer that question maybe in this direction, especially if you have multiple ways. Other than that, I would use with the most opinionated or most standard way, so to say, when it comes to APIs. Because then if you have some, other issues like migrating some code or whatever, then you're closest to a standard, which we also covered that before, which always helps you in the long run.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And I think the last question before we jump into back into live coding is how the compile time dependency injection has been implemented in Quarkus. And I think I can relate another question to that. How do you write your own bin post processors, if you like? How do you write extensions to this DI mechanism?
Yes, so I cannot answer too much in detail with that because I was not involved in like how that is being built. Basically, what it does, what Quarkus does, it analyzes all of your beans. So it scans all of them, obviously, and then does some tree shaking. So it tries to throw out what is not required, and then replaces them. There was one video trying to find it that shows a little bit of the details. Replaces them with some proxies that just wrap around some code. I mean, like, Enterprise Java always works, and Spring also, but now the difference is that this is actually done at build time, so there's actually code being generated, like Java code, that you can even watch if you want, if you decompile the Java files. But that is basically like how that works on a very general level, right? So as always, as proxies work, like there are different like details, so I cannot help you much with the actual details. Like depends on which scope you have and depends which type of injection. But basically, you're wrapping something in a proxy, but just the difference is that now this is done at build time, and you actually have some wrapped Java code that you could, or wrapped classes that you could look into in this case. The second, sorry, what was the second part of the question about the?
How do you implement your own interceptors or
yes, because especially so Quarkus has a little bit of support for some CDI like extensions if you want, but yes, if you want to include especially some third-party stuff like a third-party framework or some components, then you would need to write your own extension, especially if you want to have something natively executable, because GraalVM and Substrate VM has some limitations why this build time optimization is actually needed. Otherwise, it does not work in a native image. And then it's required that you write some Quarkus extension. I have not done that myself, actually. I think there is some guide here as well to how to get started, but it's using the extension, build my own, writing your own extension. So there is some guide here available. And again, I have not done this myself. I thought about some things that I wanted to look into it, but it's a little bit more advanced. So then you have to think of all of what happens at build time, at optimization time, and how do you actually need to generate some code that everything you do happens on a normal method invocation level, right? Like with that, where there's no indirection, no reflection, and no like annotation scanning anymore. So how to do all of these things? I would have a look into this, or ask the Quarkus team. So they're super helpful, at least from my experience. And again, I cannot help you much more than that. So it's then a little bit more advanced topic, but this is how to get started. And there,
Yeah,
but that's
so
definitely an interesting.
If there is a way and if it's documented, that's fine.
Yes. So it's more than just like annotation scanning. You don't have to like write your own annotation preprocessor or something. And so it's a little bit more sophisticated. You can have this extension like as part of the plugin then, and then plug it into the correct places, so to say.
Sounds good. All right. Let's get back to it.
Nice. Yes. What I want to include next, I mean, there are many things that you could show, and you can have a look at the guides. But I think what is quite interesting, one thing is persistence, because Quarkus has one somewhat non-standard, more opinionated way how to implement persistence. And if you're familiar with Spring and EE, then of course JPA as the somewhat base layer technology as the building blocks. And then of course we have Spring Data and Spring Data REST and Spring Data JPA, and how all of these names are to have a little bit more syntactical sugar and a little bit more helpful ways how to map that. So what I want to do now, and in this case, I just stopped my application because I will introduce some persistence here. And at first, I want to run a database, which in my case is a super boring Postgres. And later on, I will deploy it in the cloud. I will have like a different example here, but this just does a boring Docker run with an empty Postgres database, just to have something. And then what I have to do on the application side, and this is now quite straightforward, at least it's very nice compared to J2EE or Java-EE way. It's pretty similar to what Spring does. You declare some dependencies here. In this case, it's called Hibernate ORM for the relational mapping, and what is called Panache. So that's the opinionated way in Quarkus how to do it. And then, of course, the JDBC driver for Postgres. And then I can go to my coffee shop in this way, and I want to go to a coffee order and make, of course, an entity out of it. So the first thing that we know is something like put this entity annotation with some, table name on it here. And what I can do, and this is now a little bit, more sophisticated. What is there is Hibernate, that you probably know from JPA, but also with Panache, which is a somewhat entity framework, which looks a little bit like Spring Data there, but it comes with some syntax that is a little bit unknown for Java developers, or unfamiliar, so to say. So what we can say, we can have we can extend the Panache entity or Panache entity base. What I will do here, and then in this case, this will actually add some static methods in order to have your load and your persist and save statements. And then what I do, and now please don't throw some tomatoes against your screen, but I will make these properties public, which is a somewhat opinionated best practice if you want here in Panache, to have public properties, because they say, well, you're going to change them directly anyway, and then we don't really care. And in this case, this is going to be an ID and the generated value in my case. So that is the reason why I use Panache entity base and not Panache entity, that you can specify your own ID, and I want to have a UID here. And then in this case, that's going to be a public type and a public price. So all of these are fine. These are just mapped enums, and then I will get rid of all of my getters and setters. And that's basically it. So all of these things are public now. And what it will do, let's have a look at my component here. So yes, this doesn't work anymore, of course. I don't need to set this. Now this looks a little bit unfamiliar for Java developers, but yes, of course, I can set the property directly here. I can say, please, well, get the ID, but actually I will get rid of this store altogether, like completely. Why? Because this is just an in-memory hash map that I don't need. So let's delete it. And in this case, what I will do to get the orders, and again, this looks a little bit unfamiliar, I can just say, please return the coffee orders list all. So that is now the static method that is actually part of this Panache entity, and that will just, like list all orders. And that's pretty much it. So it looks a little bit like from, I don't know, whether it was that Ruby or something like that, this active record pattern to say, okay, coffee order dot find by ID in my case, or what was it, find by ID, in my case this UUID, and then we'll just retrieve this by, well, the ID, right? So, all of the straightforward things are just implemented here. What you also can do if you don't really like this pattern, and probably you will get used to it. So in the beginning, I was very hesitant actually, because this looks somewhat unfamiliar. What you can also do is use a repository. So then, you can have an entity just as a good old JPA entity with getters and setters, and private access that also, of course, works. But then have a person repository, which now you will get a déjà vu. This looks very similar to what Spring Data can do for you. And then it comes with, the default queries. So pretty straightforward here, but also you can define your own ones. So if you come from a Spring world, this will look somewhat familiar. And in this case, it's just quite straightforward to say, okay, coffee order dot persist in this case, order, and that's pretty much it. So that is how to integrate that, and I would say quite straightforward. If you come from an EE background, it doesn't look that straightforward at the very beginning, so you will, I would say, struggle a little bit in order to get used to it. But then it's actually quite helpful, and it will reduce some code. So I will now just quite quickly fix all of these compile errors that we have, because I just deleted all of these getters and setters, which are now properties. But again, of course, you can keep the getters and setters if you prefer that. And then let's start the application again. And now it will fail, well, because of a few reasons, but let's see what is the first error. So one error, of course, it does not know the database, and it tried to connect to something that it cannot find. Yes, no database here selected. How do I do this in my properties? So I can set up some persistence, in my case for my Postgres here. What I can say, that is, let's get rid of this first. The data source that I can configure, my Quarkus Postgres, in this case localhost, database name Postgres, username, password, and so on and so forth. And I can also change this for, that is a profile, so a somewhat non-standard way with this percentage. And that is a different property that is active during my dev mode. So if I say, hey, by the way, and this might happen quite often, I need some different configuration while I'm developing, because my Docker Compose or my local Docker container looks different to later on in production. And then in production, I can say, well, that is actually called, I don't know, Coffee Shop DB for the host name. But in development mode, please go to localhost, because my Docker container is running there, for example. All right, now I can try this again and say, okay, please run the Quarkus development mode, and then it will just connect to my Postgres that is now running in a Docker container. This will now take slightly longer. And then I hopefully have, if I didn't make some other mistakes, this up and running with my example that comes from my database. Let's post some, oh yes, another error. So actually the stack trace in the development mode is quite helpful. You probably assumed this error if you come from a EE background. Why there is no transactional scope here? Because there's no transaction active if you know the J2EE world and you know about EJBs, then in EJB world, there are always transactions being active on your business methods, but in this case, there aren't. So I have to put a transactional on all of the methods or on the class to say, well, that is actually going to be a transactional. And then I can probably even, let's reload this, this should work, have the running application. And now I can load my orders. So this just says, okay, that's just a warning. The orders table already exists because I tried to create it in my dev mode. And now I can create espresso and a latte. And now let's see, okay, they're actually there. Now I'm brave enough to stop my application, so now it's gone. And if I restart it, then hopefully, if it doesn't wipe all the tables, the orders are still there. And I see that this is actually persisted to, well, it's not really persistent because it's only a Docker container. And once that is gone, my coffee orders are gone, unfortunately. So again, this is just a warning. I should get rid of this create table statement. And then in this case, I still have my coffee being there. So that is basically a very quick walkthrough how to implement persistence or how to implement it in this opinionated way. Again, what I like about the approach is that all of the, I don't want to call them legacy, but all of the known standard approaches still work. So if you say, hey, you do want to have the getters and setters, if you don't like this repository, if you want to have your plain old entity manager, that totally works as well, of course. And then you just have plain entities. So that's also possible. All right. And then in the next step, what I want to show you is actually how to finally bring this to a cloud native setting, which is also the title of the meetup, how to run it in, well, a Docker and a Kubernetes way. And then I also have a different way how to run it in persistence. So we can talk about that a little bit. Are there some questions to the persistent way here, Baruch, or is that somewhat straightforward?
There are a couple of. The first is there any way to programmatically control transactions while at transactional spans the entire method? Do you have a fine-grained control? And I would say probably go ahead.
Yes, yes, you can, but I would actually go so far to say in code reviews, I search for this pattern and say it's a code smell. Like you should not do this. Yes, you can. I mean, in EE, you can also do this and with Spring, right? Manage your own transactions. But then I would really, really, really ask, why do you have to do that? And why isn't a transactional as a method wrapper not the correct way or the working way for you? So yes, it's possible, but with a question mark. If you have a good reason, then yes, maybe.
I agree with you. That's what I would kind of hesitate even asking this question, because you definitely shouldn't do it, usually shouldn't do it. The other question is, and that's an interesting one, is there any built-in support for aspect-oriented programming? And that I kind of tie it with transactional, because usually this is how it's done. The question is, do you have, as a user, ability to write aspects and then use your own custom annotations to work with them and this kind of stuff?
That's a good question. It depends to what extent. So I would say in most of the cases, no. Why? Because of this build time optimization, and you would need to tell what actually you're doing. So for example, CDI and interceptors are very powerful, but these are some concepts that are not fully supported in Quarkus. Because of, well, you actually have to know what you're doing at build time in order to make all of this happen. So it really depends what you want to build, hook into with aspects. So it's definitely not as powerful as all of the things you can do with a fully blown EE API or in Spring with Aspect.js or with whatever the current approach today is. It depends. I would say in most of the cases, probably no, without writing your own extension or without using some Quarkus extension that's already out there. Like there is some support for the most important use cases like persistence and all of the other things, but not like super complex or flexible support in order that you can do anything. But then I probably would ask the same question like before, like why would you use it, right? Or why would you need it in order to say if you have some aspects with, for example, some I don't know, sophisticated pattern matching to match some annotations or whatever in order to control to your transactions, if that is really required and if that makes sense, I would ask.
Yeah, no, that obviously makes sense as well, and I understand there are some probably complications with AOP with native images because you need to close the world, and that's the opposite approach of custom annotations and custom aspects, obviously. Another question, and that has to do with the screen that we are looking at now, the Panache. Are the alternatives supported? Most notably, obviously, Juke.
You can. That's a good question. Depends what Juke does. I'm not an expert. How many reflections things it does? Probably not in, or very sure not in the native mode. If there's not an extension, what you can do, you would get, like the data source and all of that, and can do things programmatically. But the question, how much actual reflection does Juke under the hood? So I'm not 100% sure of this answer. What I did recently, I published a video on how to connect to Neo4j, which is a graph database with Quarkus. And this works with Neo4j ORM, but only in the JVM mode, like not a native mode for the same reasons. I mean, that's actually what they did with Panache and with Hibernate, that they actually built all of these build time extensions for these, mostly for the native possibility. I cannot super definitely with confidence answer the question. I would say probably it would work in the JVM mode, but depends really what also Juke does under the hood, how much it maps, because it's actually straightforward. So it could actually be that it works if it does not include a lot of reflection. But that's a good point. I will look into this and then follow up if Juke works.
Fair enough. I think that's an interesting question, and Juke definitely has some traction, so it will be interesting to understand how we connect the two. Perfect.
Right.
All right.
But
so
integrate would be the same way like in EE, that you just get your data source and then point to it. So there was some like articles in the past how to do this in a plain EE stack, and then it would be the same here.
Yeah. So we have about 25 minutes to the end of the meetup, so we probably should get to the next part of your presentation. One request, though, that we got from our viewers is if you can switch to presentation mode in IntelliJ, so the fonts will be bigger and it will be easier to read. And with that,
actually, no, because of like this Linux setup. But what I can do, I can get rid of this one and make the code a little bit bigger. So I think that should be helpful as well, right? Yeah. If that's still too small, please shout. But I think that is pretty much the same what presentation mode gives you. That's a good point. Yes. So what I want to do next is actually how to run this in Docker and then in Kubernetes. Right, because that's also somewhat what Quarkus promises to be well suited for cloud native, whatever that means, runtimes. So basically to be run in a container, also because of that runtime and because what it does. And then I will also deploy to Kubernetes just because we can. But basically, what I want to show you first is a Docker file. And I will now in this meetup, and usually also in my projects, use the JVM mode also in the Docker, which does make some sense. And I want to talk about that a little bit as well. What I use here is actually not the OpenJDK hotspot, but that is OpenJDK OpenJ9, which also I think has some benefits. So I actually was posting some material about that in the past. So I have a video where I compare the resource consumption, and that is quite interesting because it's a JVM. Here's also a blog post from my colleague Nicholas that actually compares that with Quarkus. And the interesting thing is, if you just swap the JVM, and that is actually quite always the case, because in the way how this JVM, that's an open source alternative JVM if you want, works under the hood. It comes from a mobile background, so it's a little bit more resource consumption friendly. And you see the difference here. It already saves you quite some memory consumption just by swapping the JVM. And actually what I mostly do also in projects is to run Quarkus in this JVM mode, also in production, so in a container. Why? Because you get some benefits here when building the container. And this is about the JVM mode in general. So let me build this application again to say we have a fresh Maven build. And then, of course, I have this target directory that I showed you before. So if I now just show you this finished build, then we see that this is already a somewhat, small-ish or thin deployment artifact, these jar files here, because it's split up, that all of your libraries and all of your, implementation is contained in this lib folder. So this makes a lot of sense if we know how Docker works under the hood, because of these Docker image layers. What you do in Docker, all of these different image build file steps will later result in what is called an image layer, and they are cached and optimized individually. So in other words, if nothing here in the library in my implementation changes, so if I don't change the Quarkus version, I don't have to rebuild the world. I just rebuild what has been changes, which is actually my application, which is quite small. So if I say Docker build, let's make this bigger, and if I take my image, bash-nor coffee shop, I don't know, temp, and I build it, and then in this case, it says, I actually changed the Quarkus version. That's why it has to copy this step. But you already see, okay, that takes a few seconds, and then it can copy the rest. But if I now say, that is one thing, I can build it once. But now if I rebuild my application, then you see how, how Java works. It will be a new Java file, different signatures. But if I say, okay, do the build again, now it actually runs much faster because it uses this cache from before, only adds my application, and then it's already done. In the same way, and this is actually more interesting, if I do a Docker push, then I will just push all of the layers that actually have not been changed. So now I changed the Quarkus version. That is not a bad idea, but then I have to pay this penalty of pushing these few megabytes once. But once that happened, then the next push will just be faster because of this optimization. This actually does not work in the native mode. Why? Because if you have a native executable image, then you have to push everything all the time, which is in total still smaller, but it is bigger than just the diff of pushing your application, which makes much more sense if you think about it, because then you're pushing what only the things that have been changed, only your classes in your application, and they are then tiny. Now I have a Docker image, what I just built from, where is it? From my Docker file here, which I could run, but I can also already deploy this to Kubernetes, which is more interesting because you already saw it running locally here. And what I have, of course, are some YAML files, yay. So the session is not much about Kubernetes, but just, to see for you what I'm doing here. I have a coffee shop service and the deployment of some, image. And then I post this with some other resources, how to connect to my cluster. And what I can do, I then can just run this. How to get a Kubernetes cluster. I have one here that's a managed cluster on the cloud. So that's the IBM Cloud Managed Kubernetes. And I have one here. Why? Because then I don't have to execute all of that on my laptop. I just say, just push it to the cloud. Let's have a look into this. If you're familiar with Kubernetes, then you might know this. Kube-control to connect to my cluster, right? Kube-control get services, get pods. Well, there's nothing running. Let's change this. Let's apply all of that stuff, and then we'll just create, mostly a service and a deployment here. And again, that is just, hello world and Kubernetes. That's not that interesting. But the cool thing is now, thanks to this fast startup, also in a container, this just deploys very quickly. And actually, my application is already running, and then I can connect to it. So this is just, done really fast. And then I can connect to my application here. So now, of course, not with localhost, but with some secret script that gets me the IP of my cluster. And then I can say orders and just list, the coffee orders here in this cluster. So now it's empty. Then I can create some coffee here in the cloud. Let's do this. So, that's quite similar. On these demos, I always have to be quick because then this IP is open, and then typically one of the attendees also wants to connect and create some coffee, but that's fine during the demo. So let's create some espresso and some latte. And then let's have a look. So that is there, and now this works. Now, in case if you're wondering, hey, wait a second, where did the database come from? Because I just, locally I had some running container and then the database was there as well. Well, here it isn't because there is no part for the database. As you can see here, there's only this one. So what I do on the cloud, I mean, I could just, run this Postgres in the cloud as well. That will work equally well. But what I have here, that is just like connected. That is another service that runs on the cloud, just the managed Postgres in this case, also on the same cloud, because, then I don't have to pay for it. But it's basically a database for Postgres. And what it does, it includes the configuration here. So I have a secret ref here, which is the connection to basically this managed Postgres service. And the nice story about that, in the IBM cloud, or actually in all of the clouds, the integration is pretty nice that you say, hey, I want to connect something in my Kubernetes cluster to that database service, for example. So then you run a bunch of commands on the cloud CLI, and then you have this connection with all of the correct secret references and all of these that your credentials are already set. And then in this case, what it does, the secret reference, it basically will replace some environment variables. We can have a look into this part and set some here. Control exec, have a look into this, to the container coffee shop, and then this one. And then look into bin shell. And then we see some, let's grab for, I don't know, URL, for example, then it should be, yes, the Quarkus data source URL. And this is now here in this cloud environment being replaced with actually that connection string. And you also have some more properties for username and password, which is another somewhat Quarkus feature, or actually a config feature of microprofile config. If you say in my properties, I have Quarkus data source.url, and this is also being replaced if I have an environment variable, or I could do system properties in Java as well to basically replace this on my cloud environment as well. I could also paste it here, but I don't want to, of course, obviously check in the credentials here. So this is just being replaced on my Kubernetes setup. And then it also works on this the cloud environment. And now all of the data is here in my managed database. But I can, deploy equally well just a Postgres in my Kubernetes cluster. But, if we talk about production deployments, then, that's a whole topic on its own, whether you should run some stateful services in Kube and all these questions. So that's basically this. And that is, I think, that shows the database service here for, some Postgres where all of that data is now my coffee. And that's basically it for running things in Kubernetes. So, that is just hello world for Kubernetes. But the point is basically that you now run a workload or a runtime that is just optimized for resource consumption and optimized to be executed in containers, here in containers in general, right? So that is always true, whether you run, I don't know, Docker Compose, like we had surprisingly a lot of answers for that, or of course Kubernetes or plain Docker if you want. That just makes sense here. I want to talk a little bit more about, so that was basically the whole cloud demo, if you want. And we could show many things in the guides here. So I created some, videos on there's also a templating engine for HTML templates. So if you're interested in that, I can show a little bit of this. But actually, I would like to have some more discussion also with you, Baruch, about especially the pros and cons of this runtime. Maybe also how it connects or how it compares to some other runtimes like Spring Boot, like Micronaut, and the question whether you should go the native executable or not. Because I hear this quite often that people talk about Quarkus and then they say, hey, Quarkus, that's basically, running things natively on GraalVM. But well, yes, it is, but that's only half of the story. And this also doesn't, in my eyes, at least that's my opinion, it doesn't show the whole picture and the question whether you should always do this, right? So especially the reason why I run things almost always with Quarkus in the JVM mode, not because, all of the Java features are supported, but also it really makes sense from a deployment perspective. So if there are some questions about that, we can hook into this. But basically, how I see it is, when you run Quarkus or let me start differently. The main benefit of Quarkus is, in my eyes, at least, not the fact that you can run applications natively with GraalVM and Substrate, but basically the magic behind Quarkus, if you want, is this build time optimization. All of what happens while you run this plugin, this Quarkus plugin with Quarkus build, everything that happens during your build phase, so that later on, once you start your application, you have all of this optimization already, which always helps you. If you run in JVM mode, it helps you a lot. If you run in native mode, well, also, otherwise you couldn't even run in native mode. But the real benefit is to have this build time optimization to get rid of all of these inversion of control of all of these indirections, to have the actual executable code, the actual method invocations there, and that will always have a big impact, a positive impact on your resource consumption, your throughput, and how you run things. Now, when it comes to what to choose for production, then there are a few things to mention with comparing native mode to JVM mode. Because if you have these Docker files like this one, you only get the benefit of this layered Docker approach if you actually have a layered approach here, separating the implementation from your app. If you use the JVM mode, that does not work in native modes. Well, kind of makes sense. So you only get that, and also the build time. And I did not show you how to build a native image. It always takes a lot of time. Like, then we're not even talking about these turnaround times. It takes many seconds and actually minutes on usual machines to build a native executable image, even just from Hello World, like always. And it consumes a lot of memory, and well, in my case, it actually often crashes, even if I have some other things open at the same time with out of memory. And that is then really a question if you always want to build things down to native executable. Or if, for example, you have a pipeline like your CI/CD pipeline, where that is maybe one later step, but you don't always want to wait for it just because it takes that long until you deploy something. And also the question whether you actually will be much faster on your production deployment, especially when we mention throughput. Why? Because of the way how a JVM runs, especially with Hotspot and others, thanks to the JIT compiler, the just-in-time compiler, it will get faster and faster because it can optimize on the fly whatever hotspots you're using in your code execution. So whatever is required in your actual running scenario. And this is why the throughput of a JVM is exceptionally good, and in many cases, much better than some native technology. So that is also to be mentioned. But yeah, let's open it up a little bit for some questions and some other comments, Baruch, that also you have from your DevOps perspective to talk about this.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions, and the first, I guess, the simple one is, do you know if Quarkus can persist the HTTP sessions and if they can survive restarts and this kind of stuff?
With restarts, that's a good point. I don't think that it's something there out of the box. You would have to write that yourself. But the question is, so that is a bigger one, where I would also again ask the question, what is the bigger picture? And especially, what does your workload look like, right? Because especially if we talk about containers and all these things, then it might not even be there in order to persist something unless you explicitly mention something like a persistent volume, or like mapping something outside of the container. So that is a question where quite quickly I would ask, what is the bigger picture there, and where does it actually make sense to store some session state, even if you want to store something in a database, even, or sharing across instances. If you have multiple instances, then you have the same issue, not just when restarting. And if you want to or have to activate some sticky sessions when you have some load balancing and all these things. To answer the question, I'm not sure. I don't think that there is something out of the box with some support. At least not as far as I know. You would have to write some code to basically handle that yourself or manually. The scope with the scopes it works. Of course, that's CDI and HTTP. But then also the same question if that makes sense. If there is some, in modern
And
production workloads, if there is a better way.
I would agree with you that the question about session persisting is kind of strange in the world of microservices and elastic scalability and this kind of stuff, because actually you treat all your microservices, all your servers as completely disposable. So you definitely should plan for not having HTTP session persistency. I'm with you
Yes.
on that. There
Or
is
at least
one
think of it in
question
broader scale. Mhm.
which might be a little bit too level, and that's fine. So the question is, do you know if Quarkus is planning to support a profile guide optimization that gives additional ahead of time compilations from C2, and it's supported in Graal VM Enterprise Edition or in Oracle Cloud? And whether IBM plans to build their own ahead of time compiler based on J9 as an alternative to Graal VM.
Yeah, these are two very, very interesting questions, and we had some discussions around it. I don't know about an actual roadmap. So yes, there are definitely a lot of thoughts around this. Why? Because to answer the second question, actually there is a lot of AOT. Well, some of them are early access or early proof of concept in OpenJ9 to have AOT ahead of time compilation. Not quite in the same way like Graal does. So it's a little bit different approach. It's basically saying, okay, run whatever you will run later on in a JVM and store that already, that you can start already from a to a much later phase where you did a lot of the optimization, where Graal and Substrate is something that doesn't support like full Java, including reflection and all these things, where it supports things differently or less. But OpenJ9 is like a fully blown JVM. You can run, all of in Java, including reflection and all of that. And the AOT also supports all of it. So it supports, more, but yet you cannot get to the same, startup times for obvious reasons. So yes, there are a lot of things that are being worked on in this regard already with just with OpenJ9, with that open source Java, which is really, really interesting. I mean, some of that are not are just like early access or to be tried out. So for example, there's also JIT as a service, which is very interesting, with some approaches where you say, hey, if you have like 100 instances where always there runs the same things on all of your JVMs, well, they can just collaborate and share, and where you only have one store of all of your class caches and of all of the results that happen in JIT or in AOT as well, and share those. So that makes really makes sense. When it comes to core, so that is basically to answer the second question. Yes, there's a lot that happens in this field, and I think it's very, very interesting technology, OpenJ9. And actually, to be honest, this is now my everyday Java. So my normal Java is like an OpenJ9 version, because from experience, and I measured this many times, it's just like lower resource consumption already. With Quarkus, yes, it would make a lot of sense. Why? Because at build time, you already scan a lot of things. Basically, you scan your whole application, and then you get a lot of information already, what you actually need out there and what would help you with regards to AOT. There have also been like some thoughts. What is the best way? Should you start up your application once, like invoke some things just to get some benefits already and store that with precompiled stuff in order to be faster later? So with Docker images and Docker, that works, for example. With Quarkus, I don't think that there is something like showable yet, and I don't know about a roadmap or not an official one. So there are definitely a lot of conversations in this field, and in general, it's a very interesting approach. So yes, it's definitely a known topic, but I don't know when something will happen. But definitely there's a lot going on.
Interesting. All right. So one update and then last question. The folks digged into the issue tracker and found an issue open for Juke support. There is no much traffic there. It looks like it's not there yet. So this is for all of us to know. And the last question, not related to any of of Quarkus or anything, people actually wonder about your Russian. Obviously, everybody are very impressed with the intro that you did, and it's generally known that you are trying to learn. And as we know that Russian is a horrible language to learn, people are wondering how it is going. How much from 1 to 10 you are in pain?
Oh, that's a good question. How much? I'm actually still learning like every day. That's also my approach to learning languages. I can say I understand more and more. And if you say horrible language, I don't know even. I would say I like about Russian actually the same what I like about German. And when you look into the grammar, they're actually somewhat similar. That it's very expressive and very precise language thanks to the complex grammar. Of course, it's hard to learn, but in order to express things, that's also what I like about German. It's much more precise than English. And unfortunately, I use it. I learn it using Duolingo, and they only have English to Russian. It would actually be much easier to have German to Russian because the grammar is equally complex if you want. But yeah, it's interesting. I like it, and yeah, I don't have many sentences to show something off, but yeah, I'm definitely improving and learning every day just because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, kudos for an effort. Definitely not taken for granted, and obviously, your very large fan audience. I feel really appreciate your effort. It shows, it says a lot about you, and heads off for that.
Thanks, I appreciate it. All right, yeah. Do we have some more things to talk about, or what else? I mean, I also really like these type of discussions and
We're actually
interactive
out of
things.
You see Alexei here, which means that we're going to be kicked off the air very soon. Yep.
Like cut us off for the time. Say that's enough. Now time for Ujin.
Yeah. So, do you guys enjoy the show? Baruch, Sebastian.
I did a lot. I hope somebody else as well.
So, how many live broadcasts you attended, like the last couple of months, for example? So, starting to the COVID situation. So, do you like attend live shows weekly or daily or several times a day, or how often?
Yeah, for me, it's I think like about weekly, roughly. But especially the longer the situation holds, the more I'm actually interested in having some formats like this where it's very interactive. So I really like this, like that we have some questions and then I can have a chat with Baruch and we talk about some stuff. Because, if I would just do a presentation, then, you could watch it on YouTube also. And there are many out there. So that's just my personal opinion. I really like, the interactive way of doing online meetups like this one, where you can see, 3 of us already. And that's pretty cool. But yeah, about weekly, I would say right now because of the situation.
Baruch, and the same question. The first, how often do you attend online shows? And the second, how do you feel in this particular role? Okay, Baruch. Okay, it seems like Baruch missed us, but that's not a problem because the key idea is to have several guys in their in the show. So if we miss some of ours, yeah. So the other guys, for example, the guy who is in the studio here, it's me for this show, can replace their original guy in their in your TV. So Baruch, do you hear us or? Okay, he's still there. Okay.
He's already dreaming about the next coffee, I think.
Okay.
Exactly.
Baruch. Okay. Okay. So our studio guys are laughing because so this is kind of interactive. That our director told us, okay, Baruch, could you please move your show us that do you hear us or not? So that's not a problem. Okay. Anyway, So as you probably know, Sebastian, during this June and July, we have 8 conferences on Java, on testing, or on development distributed systems and things like that. So do you attend some of these conferences as a speaker?
Yes, I do. I will speak at, now I have to get the whole list, Heisenbach, JPoint, and I think DevOps.
Wow.
List. I hope I didn't forget any. And yes, I'm already looking forward, especially with these formats. And I also really, I have to say this, I really appreciate technology, and please a big spasiba to all of your technical folks in the background who set up, all of this streaming. And that's very cool that, you see a few of us and all of this, well, most attendees don't even see what's going behind the scenes, but that's very impressive. And I'm already looking forward to the online conferences. Yes, I mean, I really would love to be there in person, and I miss traveling as well, and practicing languages in person. But yes, I'm already looking forward, and I think that's a great substitute where also maybe more people can join in an online world.
Good. And quick test. You mentioned that you attend 3-hour conference in June and July. Do you remember your talks?
God.
So which talk do you have for us?
I could cheat and look into my list, which is on my computer. No, it's about developer productivity, and one, and I think about zero downtime deployments, if I'm not mistaken, and of course about efficient testing, which is a very important topic, and one that is dear to my heart. And I hope all of them are correct, but I think so. I'm pretty certain.
Good.
If not, you can check out the websites and look into the whole correct program there. But yeah, I'm already looking forward to these.
Okay. So, and one more question from my side is, what did you do to improve your online experience? I mean, probably you bought some cameras, microphones, and some other stuff. Could you please tell us about what it is and how it helps you to make such perfect quality of sound and video and all that stuff?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think the most important thing is actually a good microphone. And I have some help there because my brother is actually, he's an event technician, and he could recommend some, models. And
you
also
should connect us.
You
have to connect us because we need some consulting from his side.
That's good.
Okay. I think Sebastian, you've been doing it for years, right? You do those streams when you have a code in the background and all this kind of stuff. So you're pretty ready to get into this. Okay, this is all that we do now.
Really?
Much, yes. I've done that. Yeah, I think when I started with my green screen setup, what you see when you watch my videos, I think that's already a few years ago, maybe 4 years or something. But I also, like you say, I also improved the quality. So, for example, I changed the camera recently just to have like a tiny little bit more, and it's not a webcam anymore, but like a proper, more production quality. But yeah, it helps a lot. But especially also the reason why I do many of these videos is I wanted to have a setup. So this is now why one room here in my apartment is really horrible with this, a green screen and all of these lights and setup, where I can just start and record, where it does not, have to take a lot of time to set everything up and switch on, everything. For me, it's just turn on the lights and I can record, and that's really good. So I use it for Zoom calls as well, just because it's there. And that helps to be more effective, so you don't spend many hours setting it up and tearing it down. And that's why you can just do some stuff there. But yeah, I like it. It's also fun to play around with it. And, yeah.
Okay, please give one recommendation for people from all over the world who now are working remotely from their home offices.
One recommendation. Yeah. I actually I wrote a few things in the past about working from home and what helps you. But one recommendation, because this is not only working from home, it's, working during a special situation. So it's just be kind, especially kind to yourself and also kind to others, because it's, a very special situation. If you're not 100% productive right now, and if you're distracted because you don't know what's happening with the world and everything, just try to relax a little bit, try to have some empathy for others if your colleagues are not that familiar with remote technology, whatever, because this is very exceptional. I would say it's not only working remotely, but working during a very, very special and unique time. So we're all in this together, and it's going to be over at some point.
Okay, Baruch, and now is one advice from your side. So what you can recommend for our attendees?
Yeah, so I think the one single advice, if you want to do one thing, it will be invest in your microphone, because sound by far is more important than the video, and there are reasonably affordable, very good quality microphones that you can still buy. I know there is a shortage, and a lot of them are back ordered, but one thing to do, the most important thing to do to improve the experience for you and for people you interact with is try to improve your sound.
Good. And so it's like our number one, yes, but we just forget about number 0 is to have a good internet, because if you have bad internet, so your sound have no chances to go through there all the world internet from, for example, from your side to our side. So because if my understanding is correct,
more complicated because a lot of us are in the area when we don't have much choice, and basically internet is out of our choice. Even if you have good internet provider, they can have loads that are will degrade your internet. And frankly, today tools like Skype actually manage to deal with crappy internet quite well. So yeah, if you have the ability to improve your internet, do that. But in any way, having better sound, investing in your microphone will help whether you have good internet or bad.
Yeah, so and the one maybe advice from my side, please, guys, please use wired connections. So wireless are pretty okay for the time being, but wired is more stable and provide like better quality for us, because especially for such special types of event, because the event is really distributed, because we have studio here in St. Petersburg, Russia, we have Baruch in California, the US, and we have Sebastian, and Sebastian is broadcasting from Vienna or where yeah, correct,
from Austria.
Good. Okay, guys, again, thank you very, very much for this show, and it was extremely, good. I think it was extremely useful for our attendees, and now we move to the finish and say you goodbye and have a good night, guys. Bye.
Sebastian, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was great.
It was amazing. It was amazing.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me, and for everybody also listening.
So,
Spasibo большое for
attending. The last thing is that we had 500 people online. So this is amazing. Yeah, we have about from 200 to 300 on YouTube, and from 200 to 300 on our AWS-based solution, so in the meetup.jucrew.org. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very, very much for your time. Окей, дорогие друзья, я перехожу на русский, и мне осталось сказать вам буквально пару вещей. Во-первых, что штука состоялась, мы тестируем разные форматы, в данном случае распределенный митап, как вы уже поняли, я здесь сижу в нашей питерской студии, Барух у нас был в Гилрое, в Калифорнии, в своей домашней студии, Себастьян, как я понял, у нас вещал из Вены, и, в общем, штука сложная, штука состоялась, иногда вы слышали какие-то там косяки в нашем эфире, что-то какая-то системная, там, скажем так, то, что называется behind the scene, информация за кадром попала в ваши уши, но ничего страшного, мы тренируемся, мы готовимся к большим эфирам, которые у нас будут, начиная с 15 июня. Я еще раз скажу, что у нас будет 8 конференций, и, собственно, Себастьян озвучил, что он будет выступать аж на 3 из них: на Гизенбаге, на Девупсе, ну и, конечно, на нашей большой конференции G-Point. Если вы хотите, собственно, узнать про то, что мы делаем, заходите на сайт gpoint.ru, там есть, собственно, вся информация о конференции G-Point, которая у нас будет. Будет также ссылочка на все остальные наши конференции. Там в разделе с билетами можно все это детально посмотреть, какие есть еще конференции, какие там есть спикеры, какие доклады. Ну и, как вы поняли, уже даже по набору инструментов, которые у нас Себастьян использовал сегодня во время доклада, современная разработка и современная Java разработка — это нифига не только про Java, это про все подряд, про облака, про тестирование, про CI/CD, про delivery, про черт знает что. Так что мне кажется, современному разработчику дико интересно и полезно знать не только свой конкретный стэк, но и то, что происходит вокруг. Еще одна вещь, которую я хочу сказать в конце. Конечно, как всегда, на митапах Juke.ru у нас есть с вами форма обратной связи. Она коротенькая. Расскажите о том, что вам понравилось на сегодняшнем митапе, что вам не понравилось. Если вы смотрите наш замечательный митап на meetup.juke.ru.org, то там есть прямо под видео, вот здесь вот есть ссылочка, на которой, собственно, написано что-то типа «заполнить форму обратной связи». Там, сейчас я уточню, там написано «обратная связь, заполнить анкету». Там такие замечательные смайлики. Так что вот тут вот, собственно, в правой части у вас прямо вот тут вот кликайте, заполняйте там буквально несколько вопросиков. Вот. И для тех, кто смотрит нас через YouTube, насколько я понимаю, у нас просто в описании видео есть эта замечательная ссылочка на форму обратной связи. У меня все на сегодня. Большое спасибо, что были с нами, и увидимся в онлайне. Пока-пока.